This is Critical Nonsense, our high-lowbrow show about culture, science, and tech. This week, Joey asks me about phone bans.
Woo! And you say, this is what a Joey sounds like. And this is what an executive producer and Lisa Loeb shipper, Jess Vander, sounds like.
Hi, this is Jess. Whom do I ship?
Lisa Loeb and whomever she wrote that song about. I don't know. The world or my mind is chaos, and these are the random bits of detritus that pop out of it. Jess, I think the house is clean. I have nothing to say. So I would love to talk to you about bands.
Cool. Like a Make Her Dance?
No. I want to talk about school phone bans. And I guess it's been covered a lot recently. Jonathan Haidt's book came out, I believe, early this year, The Anxious Generation. And it ignited, I don't know if I would call it a firestorm necessarily, because it seemed to ignite like just a band, like everyone was ready to hop on the bandwagon. It was like this book came out, he did a press tour, and everyone's like, yep, we're on board. Like parents, educators. A little context, the book is largely about why is this generation so anxious. It points its finger a lot at social media. It points its finger at overuse of phones in sort of Jonathan Haidt hearkening back to some of his earlier work. It also points the finger at sort of, which was a previous book, was The Coddling of the American Mind. It points its finger at sort of helicopter, lawnmower, whatever type of parenting, but just sort of less independence for children, parents being more heavily engaged and kids being watched, so on and so forth, among other things. And so when this book comes out, politicians get on board, parents get on board. There seems to just be this like groundswell of everyone being like, yes, this is the thing. We're seeing this sort of anecdotal evidence in whatever capacity with our own children, with the children in our communities, with the children that we teach. And in like pretty fast fashion, these new phone bans within schools are coming out. What is interesting is that there has been pushback on some aspects of the research that Haidt has presented in the book and how he's made the case for banning phones in schools. And yet the bans are going forward, I think, because people are seeing all of this anecdotal evidence. And early reports coming out of these schools are like quite positive, at least from the educators. I saw Hank Green post something that a high school teacher friend of his said he had to do something he hasn't done in years, which was ask kids in his class to stop talking so they could get into the class lessons, which they were all pointing to as like a really positive sign. Like, you know, nature is healing. Kids are talking to each other, socializing in high school and getting to know each other. And so my question for you is, how do we know if we're doing the right thing for potentially the wrong reasons?
Well, I guess that's like the story of all parenting. Like, yes, well, yes. We'll find out. We will see how this goes.
Yeah. How big is your therapy bill in 15 years? Yeah.
Interesting. I guess in the context of phone bans, what do you see as the wrong reason to be banning them?
I guess it's not necessarily even maybe the wrong reason. It is that like the problems seem to be clear. Like kids are anxious. Many of them say that they spend too much time on social media. Or, one of the big data points in Jonathan Haidt's book, which I haven't read. I've read some of the coverage. I've heard some of his interviews and conversations about it, was the idea of like, if you had to be off TikTok for a month, how much would we have to pay you as a positive number? If everyone at your school had to be off TikTok, how much would we have to pay you? And it was actually negative. They'd be willing to pay for everyone at school not to be on like a particular social platform, which is sort of like a signal that like they want to be off but feel like they can't because of social pressures and things of that nature. And there is a lot of positive like scientific evidence of, like the signal is pointing towards being on social media too early is like has negative outcomes. Although the data is still coming through. These are not like studies that you can quickly do. They need to be longitudinal. You need to track people over time. Same with like banning phones in schools. Like to know the true impact of it, you have to wait, like 4 years or 8 years, when a freshman in a high school with banned phones like graduates college, like is there an achievement gap change? Is there like anxiety lower? Like these things take time to implement, but the problem seems to be consistent. Educators, parents, and even students are saying like that young people don't feel quite right and there are some negative outcomes. And so it seems like people are just deciding like, we're gonna do something. And it seems to be, as best I can tell, like something that is uniting like left and right politicians. It is uniting like parents and educators. Like certainly there are detractors out there, like you will always find that, but it's interesting. People are just like, we don't know what's gonna happen, but like worst case scenario, kids just pay more attention in school, so like let's go for it,
Yeah. But is that not like the way invention happens is usually from some kind of like good mistake? There's like the famous stories of like penicillin was invented because of a dirty lab equipment of like, oh, cool, thanks Fleming for letting bacteria grow on a petri dish or something while you were gone. Or like post-it notes just being like bad tape. Then it was like, wait a minute, what if we use it for this? And probably though, it reminds me of all the latest around fears, understandably, around the resurgence of polio, where it's like, or a choice that went horribly wrong, where it was like, let's just, in our efforts to try to eradicate polio for good, what if we just try to not have as much polio around, including in the oral vaccine, like close to 10 years ago, I guess. And then now it's back and it's really crazy that there are thousands of children with polio outbreaking everywhere. Sometimes maybe you make a choice and then 8 years later you're like, this who could have imagined a world without potato chips? And then, or like, now accidentally we are having a pandemic of great disease. So
yeah, I mean it is one of those things of like, what is the place for sort of intuition and logic in some of these decision-making structures? I think like increasingly over the past 20 years, by the nature of how technology is advanced and the means and ways in which we can collect data and build longitudinal data sets and study questions on a more minute level, like there's been a greater expectation of like data-driven decision-making.
Yeah.
Right? Like we sort of like accept that idea. I think that is true. At the same time, like some things are really difficult to collect data around, particularly things that are like existing within complex ecosystems, communities, networks, whatever it is, like to build non-confounded study, one, takes a lot of time because you're talking about people. Two, takes a lot of money and sort of like human resources. And three, like may still get something wrong because you're building a study that you haven't conducted before, maybe, right?
Yes.
Like, best practices, but like, how do you study this thing for the first time and ensure that like in 8 or 10 or longer years, you will like have designed the study correctly to get the answers that you need?
Yes, exactly. Not to make everything about the book that I'm reading, but also to make everything about the book that I'm reading is exactly this idea of like all of the drawbacks of experimentation, which seem like the obvious thing to do all the time, when actually, what if experiments are costly in timing, like you said, like we don't have that long, or dangerous, like oops, I guess now polio's back, or like what if you're uh like you want to know something but you can't fully study it. I think this is why even the field of nutrition is so understood, is because it is so challenging to actually experiment on it accurately. And um or like your experiment could be immoral. Like you might even, like the thing, if you're really going to test it, do you want to like mess up some of the children that do get the phones? Like what happens
Yeah.
then? It's like, oh, sorry,
Yeah.
to have a true control for this study, like half of you are definitely going to get messed up one way or the other. So of course, it all comes back to that, but the book. But anyway, which by the way, if you've heard our latest episode, I mention it, but it is the name of the book is How to Bake Pie: An Edible Exploration of the Mathematics of Mathematics by Eugenia Chang. Okay, that is all.
Well, I mean, I think like make no mistake, this is an experiment, right? But this is
Sure.
this is a larger scale experiment that is happening, in a non-coordinated fashion in many cases, right? New York State, Texas, Florida, California, like there are different school districts that are making across the country, but I point those out of like major red and blue states are running experiments of creating like no phone zones within schools. And it is an experiment that people are choosing to do based on sort of a sense of urgency around the current state of either the ways in which, pedagogy and the ways in which kids are internalizing their education, uh, a sort of growing mental health crisis as it's been described frequently, uh, kids saying like, as Hochul, the governor of New York State, is saying, like, she went out and talked to kids and they said, help us help ourselves, which, is an anecdote, TBD, like, TBD whether that is actually a true anecdote or not. But this idea of like parents and educators and politicians are feeling an urgency, they need to do something, and they're unwilling to wait until like some perfect experiment is done. And so right now what we're doing is running a ton of different experiments with different policies created. Like this is sort of what the laboratory of democracy is supposed to be about, but we are in this case experimenting with our children, but the urgency feels great enough that like people are going to do something.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I also saw some clip of Governor Hochul, and I was like, I think this is a perfect example of how um even whether the experiments will they're running, that aside, it's really interesting to see, to your point about maybe like the wrong reason side, like even in the snippet I saw from her was like the logic behind it of like, oh, like almost the um I forget exactly how she phrased it, but to me it read like, um you know can't we just do without the phones just for like well, that'd be really like let's just do that. And it's interesting to think about all of the maybe you went to school when you were in school and like you didn't have phones, and therefore like part of the reason that you think this is going to work is because you're like, well, I didn't have it growing up, so that's probably the reason this might work. Or like maybe someone else is like firmly against because they think, well, why would getting rid of phones do anything, because everybody also has computers that also can allow everybody to stay connected, and they will need those to do work because that's the way school is now, is school runs on computers. So are you hoping that all schools will do away with all technology and we're just going to have like technologically absent schooling as like the more extreme version of the experiment?
Yeah.
And it's like how maybe actually the thing that is helpful here is that despite all the fact that different people might have more value driven or nostalgia driven or politically driven ideas of why this is why this should happen, it's like maybe it doesn't really matter, but we're interested to see how it turns out. And that we pay attention to see if it's helping or not.
Yeah, I think like what people are saying right now is like this was a massive demonstration, I think, of confirmation bias, right? Like everyone was like, the phone is a problem.
This is a better way to put it. Exactly.
Yeah. The phone is a problem. These kids are on it too much. I can't tell you which is it social media? Is it games? Is it the phone itself? Is it like the sort of predatory algorithms? Like what is the thing? We don't know, but we know it's somewhere inside this box. And so we're just going to take the box away because we can't be more precise, right? Like it is amputate the arm because we don't know which muscle is like not working correctly.
It's a witch hunt.
Yeah.
Who's to say? Who's to say? But if it's like we're scared, we don't know where it's coming from, but it's probably something related to that. And so if we get rid of it, then maybe it won't be our problem anymore. Just chuck it out like, the window.
It is also interesting because I think outside of sort of emergency use case, the question of like, if you're like in an English class, like why do you need your computer? Or if you're on a Chromebook that is like a Chromebook for education and it has Google Docs and you're like writing in that form, like sure. But it's like, do I need to be on social media is like entertainment, right? It is a form of like, and certainly there are other things of communicating.
You say this, and yet in our very own field, we are often doing research on social media because it is a really valid snippet of culture. Like, what if you're writing a comparative literature article of Shakespeare and TikTok? Like, yeah, maybe you need TikTok for your studies. Who is to say? I just think
maybe in a digital anthropology class that like that would be relevant. But I think the question, like, I agree that this is like a very imprecise tool. Like it is a rock, not a scalpel. And I think what the experiment now that's happening across all of these like different school boards and wherever is not about whether or not like removing the phone is the right thing. The experiment that's happening is like, what is the best method for approaching it?
For doing that. Yeah. I have a hypothesis that is so baseless, but for my own lived experience. But my hypothesis is that school as a mode may benefit from this experiment. And that is because even as we have found and learned from the workplace and what has happened with, remote work and like the loss of the commute for many people and like the blurring of lines between personal and professional spaces, that being in the mode of doing work is something that even at home many people have to create signals for so that they can switch themselves on into that space of like, okay, I'm in work mode now. And I do think that even for myself, having like my work laptop is my work laptop, and I don't have any interest in like being at my desk or on my laptop if I'm not working, because that is an immediate signal to me that that is what I'm here to do. So who knows, but perhaps there is something like this where as much as I joked about it, like, what if all school is just a pen and paper, even if it is not the most advanced thing for a long time, but if you can get away with it in a bunch of your classes, like that mode is a very clear signal of what you're doing at any given time. But who's to say? I don't know. I wonder what the young people think. I want to know their opinion.
Well, it is like we do know, like, what do we know about the ways in which like many of the things that kids would be doing on their phones are designed, and adults, by the way, but like for the sake of this conversation, like students, like the algorithms are designed to draw attention, right? To capture attention, and they adjust what they're delivering in social media and YouTube and wherever to continue to draw your attention. Like Gia Tolentino was just on Ezra Klein's podcast and wrote an article, I believe in the New Yorker, around CoComelon. About how like it is interesting because it is children's content that was designed at YouTube algorithmically first, and so it is designed to take attention. And she is sort of both saying like, why do we have such a intense purity test around the content that kids are consuming, that it has to be educational and edifying? Like, can it just be for fun? So she's saying that, and at the same time being like, it also just feels weird when it was like, this is clearly designed and irks parents because they can see the mirror held up to them, and this is just an attention stealer for children, and they know that they're using their phones in the same capacity when they're on like Instagram or TikTok or Twitter or wherever. Like, those things are stealing your attention. But in school, the idea is like, you need to learn some subset of base things to make us a successful community, country, state, whatever. And like, you need your attention to be focused on those things, at least for those formative years. And like something that is expressly designed to steal attention maybe shouldn't be used, because like our populace needs to at least have baseline educational like achievement.
Sounds like a sound hypothesis.
But and also, who knows? Because like, literally no one knows right now.
Like, what if it's school that's boring? Like, get better, school. What if it's the people who are like creating a very anxious culture and also global connectivity where everybody knows that you didn't go to prom with Jason? I don't know. It's just, there's like, just who's to say?
I was thinking you were going to make that point that you just made now before, of like, what if the school, like, what if schooling is broken, right? Like school, because there's a version of this.
I don't know.
There's a version of this in work too, right? Like this question of like RTO and how much do people need to be in person? Like, that is still being like, the pendulum is swinging back and forth of like, people need to be in the office. No, they don't. Everyone can be fully remote. These fully remote companies are not performing. Like, we don't know what's happening there either. And people are just running lots of experiments. And it feels like, well, the sort of question of like, what is being engaged with is different. Like, phones in schools versus bodies in person in this like back to work or return to office debate. It feels like it's the same thing. Like, we don't have enough data to answer these questions, would probably need to be longitudinal, and people have to make decisions now. And so like, you know, who is making the decisions and with what intent? like what are their sort of objectives and agendas. And so it'll be interesting to see, but like some of the early anecdotes seem like it's like, oh, maybe kids do seem a little bit happier when they're not glued to their phones. So like come May or June, as like kids are getting out of high school, it'll be interesting to see what is going to emerge, because I think a lot of researchers are like, great, we have like, these are live, like in situ experiments, and we just have to monitor.
Yeah, we'll see. We shall see. Is it the right thing? Is it the wrong thing? What is the reason? Who is to say? Yet.
Was that Jess's live experiment? Who did right or wrong corner?
Probably.
You want to try and do a wrap up corner?
Oh no. Well, here's my wrap up corner. Does anyone actually use the focus feature on their phones? And is there an equivalent in the Android universe? This is just asking, and does that help people?
I do.
Doesn't it take a ton of work to get it programmed to know what time you want to be focused and to have an awareness of what focus is desirable?
I use it a lot on my computer, especially like if I'm in calls, because you can hit the focus button. It says like 1 hour until this evening, until the end of the next event, like whatever. It gives you options for how long you want it to be in that mode. So like if I'm on a call and I'm just getting like a ton of texts from my family or something, I'm like, focus, bye.
Sorry, call you later. Love you, Mom.
Yeah. I mean, I think the wrap up corner is guinea pigs. We're all them. They're all us.
Yeah, and also, do we need to have animal testing, Joey?
That's a different topic. I saw a whole thing about like young science, like neuroscience and biology researchers like making it to like PhD level programs and getting into a lab and realizing they have to do a lot of experiments on mice and are like not okay with it. And
so like
so there are some people trying to come up with solutions, but I saw that last week.
Yep. Wow.
It's hard. I was in one of those labs. It was weird. Didn't love it.
Wow. I want to know this. Listeners, let us know if you want to hear an hour of us talking about mice. Just send us a note at this is nonsense. No, critical nonsense at Sylvain.co.
Well, we did it.
Cool.
Critical Nonsense is a Sylvain production.
Brought to you by New Phone. Who this?
As always, we'd like to thank our executive producer and gerbil, Jess Vander.
Thanks. We'd also like to thank sound engineer and the YouTube optimized
algorithm.
He's just a great guy, Alex Contel.
We'd like to thank our programming coordinator and nutria, a large rodent, Les Jacobs.
Oh, you take that back. Do something nice.
It was a large rodent that might be in the Houston area, like in those sort of like brackish, it's in the Gulf. So I was trying to think of somewhere where Les was, what would be the rodent of choice. Anyways,
we
carry
love
on.
You, Les. Anyway, here we are. Thank you to our production crew and also Yap Queens, Sarah Gilbert, Nora Mestridge, Christy Jensen, and Amy Waters.
And as always, thanks, Ellen.
Thanks.
Special thanks to the capybara.
Oh.
The biggest rodent and everybody's friend.
Yeah. And special thanks to the Princess Bride for introducing the concept of rodents of unusual size. That's just forever taking up space
I haven't
without
seen that
rent.
movie in so long. Like,
Just
what
think about
is
it.
what
It's
is
so-
the rodents of unusual size reference?
It's in the forest. It's in like the scary wooden land where there's shockingly a lot of quicksand and also mega rats that try to tear your limbs off.
I mean-
Spoiler alert.
Two things, like, we were so scared of quicksand growing up. It was in like every cartoon.
Where is quicksand?
Yeah.
Not
Is
very
quicksand
present.
even exist? Like, is it
Is that
it
just
real? Like,
a
I
mirage?
don't know.
Is quicksand like unicorns, where everyone knows it and no one has experienced it?
Like, I grew up in New Hampshire, and I'd be like playing in the forest, and I'd be like, careful, there might be quicksand under those leaves. Like, there was no chance of being quicksand under those leaves.
You know what is actually a really interesting example of a quicksand-like colloid is if you've ever made sesame paste. It's really, really interesting. You know what I'm talking about? Where you blend up sesame and you add water to it, and somehow you're like, usually when you add water to stuff, it gets thinner. But excuse me, when you add it to sesame, it gets thicker first when it's agitated, and then it gets thinner after you add even more water. And so in my mind, I'm like, every time I'm stirring up a sesame paste thing, which in Chinese cooking is actually not infrequent, it's like, it's like, imagine if this is what it was like, you would be locked in. That's it. Game over.
I just looked it up, and it was like, quicksand, while a murky nuisance, is not deadly. It's almost impossible to die in
Not
it.
that scary.
Yeah.
Goodbye, world.
I'll never make it.
Yeah, you should be way more scared of lava. If you're near an active volcano, you should be actively concerned about lava.
Or if you're in Los Angeles, tar pits. Tar pits, you should be concerned.
You should be concerned about tar pits. And if there were some just heinous quantity of sesame paste and you're stuck in a pool of it.
Whatever you do, don't go down the Asian food aisle in your local grocer if someone knocked over the shelf of sesame paste.
That's
because
just a deadly trap.
it is dangerous. I want to warn you in advance. They actually have different signs of, like, instead of caution wet floor, it's like caution sesame quicksand. Like,
So ridiculous. The image is so clear. If we have any artists out there who would like to create a sesame paste quicksand cartoon, and if you don't, I'm
caution
gonna have to do it.
sesame-based
Just
colloid. Now-
Did I even use the right? Is that the right use
Yeah.
of colloid? Who's to say? It
It
just
is a colloid.
all.
Colloid. I would have said colloid had you not said colloid first, and I don't know what the right answer to that pronunciation is.
I think I said it right, but that's just me.
I have no. I'm just saying, I would have said colloid. I have zero knowledge which is the correct way to say it. So I may be stating that I would say it wrong.
To be continued. To be corrections departmented. I mean, we already learned that in this call, and by we I mean you learned. The
If
name
I
of
knew
our
how to,
governor.
based on my minimal understanding of how to read the phonetic alphabet in the dictionary, it looks like you're pronouncing it right. K-A with an umlaut, comma, Lloyd. That looks like colloid to me.
Well,
Colloid. But also, why? Why would that not be colloid?
Because there are two L's.
You don't say a
course.
covalent bond.
Yes, but that's because there's two L's.
Well,
and another O.
fair enough. I don't have these answers.
No, I'm saying that. I'm like, but then there's co-locate. So honestly, it's hard out here. We'll come back to you. Bye.
Yeah. Bye. I love you, Mina. Bye.
Sorry, Alex.